In Ezekiel 37, there are actually 4 layers that the prophet sees about positioning. And I'm going to try to translate those 4 layers for you real quickly in a concept that I think you can appreciate and apply to your local church and your own ministry. Because whenever the prophet is getting this vision, the first thing that God speaks to him about is the skeleton. He says, prophesy to the bones and tell the bones to come together or become connected. They were creating a skeleton. Now, we know from a human body perspective that everything about our body hangs on a skeletal structure. In other words, if you don't have a skeleton, we'd just be a big blob of muscle and tissue, and it'd be a heart pumping over there, but you don't have much mobility or functioning because everything hangs on the skeletal system. Nobody likes talking about the skeleton. It's not very exciting. You know, my brother was involved in construction for over 25 years, and right here in Oklahoma City, many of you, and probably in your towns represented, whether it's Lawton or some of the others, know that whenever builders complete a number of homes, they often put in the newspaper an ad called the Parade of Homes. Come by and look at these homes and see the finished product and look at all the great looks. And they want you to walk in there, fall in love with the place, and buy the house. And I said to my brother one day, did you notice that they never do a parade of foundations? They never invite the city to come out and look at this big old concrete slab and look at the plumbing coming out of the floor and look at the studs that we have and all the electrical wiring that's showing out there. And people don't show up at the parade of foundations and look over there at that plumbing and say, now that's going to be one dandy toilet right there, yes sirree. And nobody looks at a big slab and say, boy, that's going to be a dandy house. I can imagine it right now. Because nobody likes talking about the foundation. But here's what's important. If you don't have plumbing and electrical and all the infrastructure into your building, then you just have a shell that's non-inhabitable and non-functioning. I can take you to those shells. If you go to Los Angeles or even Orlando, Florida, to the movie sets that have been created there, on the front side, they look like a full functioning house. But when the tram turns the corner, there's a bunch of 2x4s and 2x6s holding up the front of a house, and there's no plumbing, no electricity, and no ability to habitate that particular piece of property. Again, I'm back to the concept that so many churches are making the front image look good, but behind the scenes, there's no vitality or sustainability through the structure. I'm talking about leadership. I'm talking about administration. I'm talking about organization. I may even be talking about your facility in some cases. You have to have a sustainable infrastructure to be able to sustain. You will never have a ministry larger than the sustainability of your skeleton. Let me say it a different way. If I had an 8-year-old boy standing up here with me right now, I'm 51 years old. What would happen if you took 51-year-old mature body of mine and put it on the skeleton of an 8-year-old boy? What would happen to his skeleton? It would fracture, wouldn't it? It would break because it can't handle the load of a 51-year-old body on an 8-year-old skeletal frame. So it would fracture, it would break because it can't handle the load. This is exactly what's happening to churches over and over again because churches have big evangelistic campaigns, they have a big Easter, they have a big Christmas, new people come in, and because the skeleton or the infrastructure of the church has not expanded to accommodate for the new growth, then it fractures and it goes right back down to the same size it was before it had its great outreach and endeavor. If you're going to be able to sustain growth, you have to expand your infrastructure, you have to expand your skeleton and make it large enough to be able to handle what's going to be laid on it in terms of new growth. The second area are the sinews or sinews, depending on which one you prefer to refer to them as. These are like the human operating systems that attach themselves to the skeleton of the human body. Depending on whose biology class you might have attended, some of them tell us that there are 10 human operating systems, others say 12 to 13, depending on how you divide up some of the categories. At the end of the day, though, wrapped upon my skeleton and upon your skeleton, there are human operating systems. There's a circulatory system, there's a muscular system, there's all kinds of sensories, there's a nervous system, things that wrap themselves around the skeleton. For me, these things, the sinews or sinews, are the ministries of the church. I can have a great building here, but if I don't have good ministries operating on the inside that gives life and mobility to this structure and to this location, then we don't have a healthy church. I can have a great looking building, but if I don't have healthy ministries operating on the inside, then I don't have a healthy body. You can have a great skeleton, but if the human operating systems are not healthy wrapping around it, it's going to impair your ability to be effective as a church. Now, I want you to understand that just one system in your church could impair the growth of the entire church. One system. For example, this past year, or a little over a year ago now, I was just, traveling and speaking, and I had some problems in my heart, and it was discovered that I had a heart blockage. And so I had to deal with that blockage. And the doctor was saying to me, Terry, it doesn't matter that all the other parts of your body are okay, kidney function and all those things. That one blockage, if we don't deal with it, could literally stop you dead in your tracks. One thing can keep your ministry. Here's the problem that we have. We say, man, we got great preaching, we got great singing, we got great greeters, we got great this. And so we focus on what we're good at because we don't want to really focus on the things that we're not so good at. But the bottom line is it may be those things that are actually undermining your ability to go forward. Because how many churches could we interview today that we'd say, why should people come to your church? And most people say, because we got a great preacher, we got great music, we got friendly people. I mean, it's the same. No matter what denomination, everybody feels the same way. But it's those hidden pieces like the heart. You don't see my heart today, but it's the hidden pieces of my system that may be impairing whether or not my ministry can be growing or effective. So we have to do a diagnostic. We have to do an analysis that not only looks on the surface, but looks under the surface to find out if we're healthy enough to sustain the growth that God is wanting to bring to us. The third level in that story is the skin. The skin factor to me is really pretty simple, but some people need help with it. The bottom line is this is about your demographics and it's about your style of ministry. It's about your church connecting and being relevant to the target group or to the community that you're trying to serve. I have a friend of mine who happens to be African American, who he and his wife, they have a particular place in America that they love going to vacation regularly for years. And one day he calls me and he says, Terry, I just thought I'd tell you, I know you love church planning. My wife and I are going to be going into church planning. And I said, great, where are you going? And he named the place that he was going to go to. And I said, well, what's your vision there? And he says, we want to be the first 1,000 member African American church in that particular county. And I said, well, that's a great vision. That's your great leader, all that's wonderful. But I said, have you really looked into the community closely? And he said, why? Why do you ask? I said, well, I was working with a church there and I did a demographic study up there. And in my demographic reports, it indicates that there's less than 300 African Americans within a 50-mile radius of where you're going to plant your church. So I'm not sure how you're going to have a 1,000-member African American church when there's only 300 African Americans in that community. What I'm saying is we have to connect. We have to make sure that we're relevant to the particular community that we serve. This church a number of years ago was pretty much an upper white middle class community church. It was a highway interchange church, and that's how it was viewed, and it had an ability to attract that kind of group of people. When I came 18 years ago, the demographics around this church had shifted significantly. The population centers had shifted. There's a lot of African Americans, a lot of Asians, a lot of different ethnic groups around this church. So when I was asked what would be the vision of this church, I said to them, I believe that the sustainability and the longevity of this church, in this case, not in everybody's case, but based on our community, would be that we would have to be a very strong multi-ethnic congregation and that we needed to strategize and plan accordingly. Well, some of them didn't like the ideal, but eventually we began to move in that direction. And today, on any given Sunday morning, we have over 50 different nationalities that worship at Faith on a given Sunday morning because we understood our skin. We had to be relevant and connect to our community. We also have different styles of services. We still have traditional, we still have contemporary, we have a bilingual service, we have an African international service. We have a mixture of things to meet the different needs. Your job is, in terms of your skin, is try to make sure that the church has relevance in the community where you are. Don't be trying to reach a group of people that aren't even there. Target your ministry in such a way. I know we're a whosoever will church. We want everybody to come, so do we. But we understand that there's certain demographic realities that we have to associate with that reflect style choices, ministry programming, staffing decisions, the way we do music, the way we deliver message, whether I dress in a suit or dress in jeans. All of those things are relevant. You have to find out the skin that you're dealing with. The fourth factor is the spirit factor. After he prophesies to the bones and the skin, and the sinews and the skin, then he says to God, God, the bones and the bodies are all there, but there's no life in them. And he says, well, prophesy to the wind, which represents the Spirit of God, and command the wind to breathe into these bones. Now, I am, as I've said to you before, of a Pentecostal charismatic persuasion, which believes in the open work of the Holy Spirit, as all of you believe in a work of the Holy Spirit, I know. Well, as I began to think about that, some of my, quote, classical Pentecostal friends got a little offended at me because the last thing I talk about is the fact that we need God to breathe on our ministries in order to give them the greatest fruitfulness or effectiveness that they need to be. They said, that should have been the first thing. I said, I didn't write this story. God gave this message to Ezekiel. I'm just interpreting it for you. And when God speaks to Ezekiel, He doesn't say to Ezekiel, when He shows him the valley of dry bones, just prophesy to the wind, Ezekiel, and say to the wind, breathe upon these bones and they'll come alive. God took Ezekiel on a journey. He said, we got to get the skeletons right. We got to get the sinews or the operating systems to the human body in place. We got to get the skin on them so that they're relevant and apply to that community. And after you get your house in order, then I will breathe on it and I will make it like a mighty army. Can I give you another thing that'll mess with you a little bit? In Acts chapter 2, which is a favorite passage for my Pentecostal persuasion, on the day of Pentecost, they were all in one place, in one mind, and one accord, and there came a sound, it was a rushing mighty wind, it filled all the house where they were sitting. You know the text I'm talking about? The outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And I say, everybody focuses on Acts chapter 2, and they're wondering why there's not a greater outpouring in their churches. And I'll say the reason why is because you're skipping over Acts chapter 1. In Acts chapter 1, there's a passage there in which Jesus tells them to go into the upper room and pray for 10 days or to wait. They don't know it's going to be 10 days, but to wait in the upper room until the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. When they get up there, they begin to pray, and then a guy named Peter does something really, really stupid, something he should not have done in the upper room. He reads the Bible in the upper room. Don't do that, he said. But he reads the Bible in the upper room. And while he's reading the Bible, he makes a discovery. And here's the discovery he makes. He discovers that their house is out of order. Because here's what he discovers. He notices that there's been one named Judas who's betrayed Christ, who's killed himself. And so they don't have 12 disciples right now, which is the number of God's order. They only have 11 disciples right now. That's not completion. God's order is 12. 12 disciples, 12 tribes. 12 was God's number of completion. They only had 11. Their house was incomplete. So what does Peter suggest? He says what we need to do is we need to have an election in the upper room. I have to tell you, I've been in a lot of churches, but I never knew that an election on a business meeting could cause revival to break out in a local church. It usually causes a different reaction in most of our churches today. But they had an election in the upper room, found the successor to Judas, and when they are 12 disciples again, then Acts chapter 2 verse 1 says, and they were all in one place, in one mind, in one accord. Here's what I'm saying to you. You're not waiting on God to bless your ministry. God is waiting on us to get our house in order so He can breathe on our ministries. If we get the house in order, God says you get yourself in a position to be breathable by God. God said to Ezekiel, I'm not going to breathe until you get everything in order. God didn't pour out His Holy Spirit in Acts chapter 2 until they got their house in order. We have to get our house in order for God to breathe upon our ministries and do what He best can do. We plant, we water, but God gives the increase. But we have to position our church to be breathed upon or to be blessed by God.